The air in the grand hall of Varelli's palace shimmered with tension, thick as molten glass and just as fragile. Sunlight from the twin suns of Zyra pierced through the crystalline dome overhead, scattering prismatic shards across the polished obsidian floor. At the center of it all stood Corrin Vale, human, weary, and utterly out of place in his simple leather and steel field uniform amidst the sea of armored alien nobles and silk-draped courtiers. His boots were still dusty from the desert skirmish he'd survived only 3 days prior, and the scent of scorched sand clung to him like a second skin. He hadn't asked for an audience. He hadn't even known he was being summoned until 2 royal guards with iridescent blue scales and eyes like liquid silver dragged him from the infirmary cot where he'd been stitching up his own shoulder wound. Queen Zarina sat upon the obsidian throne, her posture regal yet coiled like a predator ready to strike. Her skin was the deep cerulean of twilight oceans, flawless and cool to the eye, and her long white hair cascaded down her back like frozen starlight, threaded with strands of gold that caught the light with every subtle movement. She wore armor, not ceremonial but battle-worn, forged from the same meteoric alloy that had once shielded her ancestors during the Great Sundering. Her gaze fixed on Corrin with unnerving intensity, sharp enough to flay flesh from bone. Around them the court held its breath. Even the whispering wind chimes made of hollowed comet fragments fell silent. "Why don't you love my daughter, human?" Queen Zarina's voice cut through the silence like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command honed over centuries of rule. The question hung in the air, absurd and dangerous at once. Corrin blinked, stunned not by the accusation, but by the sheer impossibility of it. He barely knew Princess Lysara. They'd exchanged maybe 10 words since he'd been brought into the palace after saving her life during the ambush near the salt wastes. He'd pulled her from the wreckage of her skimmer, her leg broken, her face streaked with ash and blood, and carried her 30 miles through dune storms with nothing but a canteen and a half-charged pulse rifle. He hadn't done it for reward. He'd done it because leaving someone behind wasn't in his bones. Now, standing before her mother, the most feared sovereign in the quadrant, he felt the absurdity of the situation bubble up inside him like laughter waiting to burst. He swallowed it down, but not before a small, crooked smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "She's too beautiful," he said simply. The court gasped as one. A noblewoman dropped her fan. A guard shifted his weight, hand twitching toward his sidearm. But Queen Zarina didn't move. Her eyes narrowed, unreadable. "Explain yourself," she commanded, though her tone had lost some of its steel. Corrin took a slow breath. He wasn't a poet. He wasn't a diplomat. He was a soldier who'd spent more time patching wounds than weaving words. But he spoke truth, and truth had its own kind of power. "Your daughter, she walks like starlight given form. She speaks like rivers singing over stone. When she laughs, which I've only heard once, it sounds like bells ringing in a temple no one's visited in 1,000 years. How could anyone not be awed by her? But awe isn't love. Love is messy. Is burnt stew and mismatched socks. Is holding someone when they're crying over something you don't understand. Is choosing to stay even when you're tired. I don't know your daughter well enough to love her, but I respect her. And I'd die before I let harm touch her again." Silence returned, heavier this time. Somewhere in the high balconies, a bird, a native skylark with feathers like cobalt flame, let out a single, clear note. Then, from the arched doorway behind the throne, a soft voice spoke. "You remembered I laughed." All heads turned. Princess Lysara stood there, leaning lightly on a cane of woven moonwood, her own blue skin paler than her mother's, her white hair braided with tiny silver charms that chimed with each step. She wore a simple tunic of indigo linen, unadorned save for a single pendant shaped like a crescent moon, the symbol of the House of Varellis. Her eyes, wide and luminous like twin pools of glacial water, were fixed on Corrin. "I didn't think you noticed," she said, stepping forward despite the disapproving glance from a nearby advisor. "I notice everything," Corrin replied, his voice quieter now, "especially things worth remembering." Queen Zarina rose from her throne, the movement fluid and deliberate. She descended the dais slowly, her golden armor catching the light like a living flame. She stopped between her daughter and the human, studying them both as if seeing them for the first time. "You speak plainly, human," she said at last. "Too plainly for court. But perhaps that is why my daughter has not stopped speaking of you since the salt wastes." Lysara flushed, a faint lavender hue blooming beneath her blue skin. "Mother!" Zarina raised a hand, silencing her gently. "Peace, little star. You have hidden your heart well, but not well enough. She turned back to Corin. You say you do not love her, but would you stay? Not as a guard, not as a guest, as something more. Corin hesitated. He thought of Earth, of crumbling cities and endless wars, of a home that no longer felt like home. He thought of the quiet strength in Lysara's eyes when she'd refused painkillers so she could stay alert during their trek through the dunes. He thought of how she'd shared her last strip of nutrient paste with him, even though she was starving too. I would stay, he said, if she wanted me to, not because you command it, not because of duty, but because I'd like to know her, really know her, even if it takes a lifetime. A flicker of something, relief, amusement, passed over the Queen's face. Then you will train with her, she declared. She has been idle too long, sheltered by grief and fear. You will teach her what it means to fight not just with weapons, but with heart. And she will teach you the ways of our people, so you do not stumble blindly among us like a lost child. Before Corin could respond, alarms blared through the palace. A deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in the bones. Red emergency glyphs flared to life along the walls. A messenger burst into the hall, panting, his uniform torn and stained with plasma burns. Your Majesty, the Iron Maw has breached the outer shield. They're attacking the eastern spire. Zarina's expression hardened instantly. How many? Dozens. Maybe hundreds. They've got grav tanks and phase rifles. They're shouting for the princess. They say she's the key to the Heartstone. Lysara paled. The Heartstone? They can't have it. If they activate it without the royal bloodline's consent, it'll tear the planet apart. Corin didn't hesitate. He unbuckled his pack, tossed aside his coat, and rolled up his sleeves. Where's the armory? The Queen studied him for a heartbeat, then nodded sharply. Follow me. What followed was chaos wrapped in courage. Corin found himself sprinting through corridors of living crystal, dodging falling debris as energy blasts cratered the walls. He fought alongside Lysara, who moved with surprising grace despite her injured leg, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air that summoned shields of solidified sound. Together, they held a bridge against a squad of Iron Maw raiders, hulking mercenaries clad in black exosuits, their faces hidden behind snarling masks. Corin used his knowledge of human guerrilla tactics, setting traps with scavenge tech while Lysara disrupted their comms with harmonic pulses. At one point, a raider lunged at her from behind. Corin threw his knife without thinking, embedding it in the attacker's neck. He reached her side in seconds, pulling her close as another blast rocked the floor beneath them. You didn't have to do that, she whispered, breathless. Yes, I did, he said, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. Because now I'm starting to remember more than just your laugh. Later, in the relative safety of the royal war room, as engineers scrambled to reinforce the palace shields, Corin sat beside Lysara on a bench carved from a single piece of asteroid iron. She offered him a flask of something that tasted like mint and lightning. You really think I'm too beautiful? She asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. I think you're terrifyingly capable, he corrected gently. And yes, beautiful, but not in the way people mean when they say it. You're beautiful like a storm, unpredictable, powerful, and full of life. She smiled then, truly smiled, and the sound that escaped her was indeed like bells. Outside, the battle raged on. But inside, something quieter, and far more enduring, had begun to take root. Queen Zarina watched them from the shadows of the command balcony, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But if one looked closely, they might have seen the faintest softening around her eyes. She had asked a question expecting defiance or flattery. Instead, she'd received honesty wrapped in humility, and perhaps, the first true hope her daughter had known since the death of her father. The war wasn't over. The Iron Maw still clawed at the gates. The Heartstone's secret still hung in the balance. But for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a tomb waiting to be sealed. It felt like a door creaking open. And Corin Vale, human soldier with dust in his boots and kindness in his chest, stood ready to walk through it. Not as a conqueror, not as a pawn, but as a man who had finally found something worth fighting for beyond survival. In the days that followed, training sessions became shared meals, which became late-night conversations under the twin moons. Corin learned that Lysara loved ancient poetry and hated formal dances. She learned that he could fix a plasma coil with a paperclip and a prayer, and that he still carried a photo of his little sister in his boot, even though she'd been gone for 10 years. They argued about tactics, laughed over terrible jokes, and once, During a sandstorm that rattled the palace windows, she fell asleep leaning against his shoulder, her white hair tickling his neck like snowflakes. Queen Zarina observed it all, silent and watchful. She never interfered. But sometimes, when Corin passed her in the halls, she would give the barest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. Then came the night of the eclipse festival, when the twin suns aligned and the sky turned violet. Tradition demanded the royal family present themselves on the sky balcony to renew their bond with the stars. But as Lysara stepped forward in her ceremonial robes, a shadow detached itself from the crowd. A traitor, cloaked in royal guard colors, dagger gleaming with neurotoxin. Corin saw it before anyone else. He moved like lightning, tackling Lysara out of the way just as the blade slashed through empty air. The assassin turned on him, eyes burning with fanaticism. "The Heartstone must be freed from blue blood," he snarled. They fought on the edge of the balcony, hundreds of feet above the city. Corin was outmatched in strength, but not in cunning. He used the assassin's momentum against him, flipping him over the railing, but not before taking a slash across the ribs that burned like ice. Lysara screamed his name. She didn't hesitate. She leapt after the falling assassin, not to kill him, but to retrieve the data chip strapped to his wrist, the one containing the Iron Maw's entire invasion plan. When she landed safely on a lower ledge, clutching the chip, Corin was already being helped up by palace medics. Blood soaked his shirt, but he was grinning. "You're insane," he called up to her. "And you're bleeding?" She shot back, climbing back up with feline grace. "Hold still." She knelt beside him, pressing her palm to his wound. Her skin glowed faintly, and warmth spread through his body like sunlight after rain. It was a royal healing gift, rarely used, reserved for dire moments. "Why'd you do that?" he asked softly. "Because you called me a storm," she whispered. "And storms don't let their anchors drown." From the throne room window, Queen Zarina watched them, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to hope, not just for peace, but for joy. And somewhere in the heart of the palace, deep beneath layers of stone and starlight, the Heartstone pulsed gently, as if in agreement. The healing warmth of Lysara's touch lingered in Corin's ribs long after the medics had finished stitching him up. He should have been resting, but sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when the data chip Lysara had recovered pulsed with secrets that could unravel everything. The Iron Maw weren't just mercenaries. They were puppets, and the hand pulling their strings belonged to someone inside the palace walls. Queen Zarina convened the High Council in the Chamber of Echoes, a circular room carved from a single meteorite, its walls humming with ancestral memory. Corin wasn't invited, but Lysara insisted, and for the first time, the queen didn't overrule her daughter. So he stood near the back, arms crossed, still favoring his side, watching as holographic schematics flickered above the obsidian table. The chip revealed encrypted transmissions between the Iron Maw and a high-ranking official, someone with clearance to access the Heartstone vault. "The traitor wears our colors," Zarina said, voice low and dangerous. "They know the palace rhythms, the guard rotations, the blind spots in our surveillance net. This isn't an outside attack. It's a betrayal from within." Suspicion crackled through the chamber like static. Eyes darted. Accusations hung unspoken. Then Lord Vexus, the queen's chief advisor, a gaunt, silver-eyed elder with skin the color of storm clouds, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he intoned, "perhaps it is time we questioned those who do not belong. The human has been here only weeks, yet he appears at every turning point, saving the princess, intercepting assassins, now deciphering enemy codes. Is it loyalty or cunning?" All eyes turned to Corin. Lysara started forward, but her mother raised a hand. "Let him speak." Corin met Vexus's gaze without flinching. "If I were the traitor, I wouldn't have stopped that assassin on the balcony. I'd have let him kill her and walked away with the Heartstone key." He paused, then added dryly, "Also, I don't even know where the vault is." A few nobles chuckled nervously, but Vexus's lips thinned. Convenient. Before the tension could escalate, alarms blared again, different this time. Not external, internal. The Heartstone chamber's biometric seals had been breached. Zarina moved like lightning. "Seal the palace. No one enters or leaves." She turned to Corin. "You stay with Lysara. Protect her." But Lysara was already running toward the vault corridor, cane abandoned, her bare feet silent on the stone. "No," she called over her shoulder. "I'm going with you." Corrin sprinted after her. They reached the vault entrance just as the massive door groaned open. Inside, the Heartstone floated in midair, a pulsating orb of liquid light, veins of gold and cobalt swirling within it like galaxies in motion. And standing before it, hand outstretched, was Lord Vexus. "You?" Lysara breathed, horror dawning in her eyes. Vexus turned, his expression calm, almost sorrowful. "I did this for Zyra, child. The Queen clings to peace while the galaxy burns. The Heartstone can end wars not with treaties but with power. Absolute power. And I will wield it to save our people. Even if they curse my name." He slammed his palm onto a hidden console. The floor beneath Corrin and Lysara split open, dropping them into a containment pit lined with null field emitters, technology designed to suppress alien bioenergies. Lysara cried out as her healing glow flickered and died. Corrin hit the ground hard, pain flaring in his ribs. Above, Vexus began the activation sequence. The Heartstone brightened, its hum deepening into a resonant thrum that vibrated through the planet's core. Outside, the twin suns dimmed unnaturally. Cracks spiderwebbed across the sky dome of the palace. "He's going to destabilize it," Lysara whispered, panic edging her voice. "If he forces a resonance without royal blood anchoring it, the entire continent will shatter." Corrin scanned the pit. Smooth walls, no handholds, but there, near the edge, a maintenance conduit half hidden behind a panel. "Can you boost me?" he asked. She nodded. They'd trained together for weeks. She knew his strength. He knew her timing. She cupped her hands, and with a grunt of effort, launched him upward. He caught the lip of the conduit, hauled himself in, and crawled through narrow service tunnels slick with condensation. Minutes later, he emerged behind Vexus, silent as shadow. "Wrong move, old man," Corrin said, and tackled him just as the final glyph lit up. They crashed to the floor, grappling. Vexus was stronger than he looked, his fingers closing around Corrin's throat. "You think love makes you noble?" the elder spat. "Love makes you weak. It blinds you to necessity." Corrin drove his elbow into Vexus's temple, breaking free. "Necessity without compassion is just tyranny with better lighting." He kicked the console, disrupting the sequence, but not enough. The Heartstone was already surging, its light bleeding into the walls, melting stone into glass. The palace trembled. Somewhere, a tower collapsed with a thunderous roar. Then Lysara appeared at the vault entrance, limping but determined. She held a ceremonial dagger, the same one used in royal bonding rites. Without hesitation, she slashed her palm and pressed it against the Heartstone's containment field. Her blood sizzled in the air. The stone responded instantly, its chaotic energy calming, folding inward like a flower closing at dusk. But the strain was immense. She screamed as raw power flooded her veins, her blue skin glowing white-hot. "Lysara!" Corrin rushed to her, catching her as she collapsed. Vexus staggered to his feet, reaching for a fallen pulse pistol. But before he could fire, a blade flashed through the air, embedded in his chest. Queen Zarina stood in the doorway, her armor scorched, her face streaked with ash, but her eyes blazing with fury and grief. "You betrayed my trust," she said softly. "And my daughters." Vexus fell without a word. Silence returned, broken only by Lysara's ragged breathing. Corrin cradled her, pressing his jacket to her bleeding hand. "Stay with me," he urged. "You're not allowed to vanish on me now." She managed a weak smile. "I told you, storms don't drown their anchors." Medics arrived, followed by engineers stabilizing the vault. The immediate threat was over, but the cost was heavy. Half the eastern wing lay in ruins. Dozens were dead. And the Heartstone, though stabilized, had been permanently altered by Vexus's tampering. It now resonated only with Lysara's unique frequency. She was bound to it now and forever. In the days that followed, the palace became a fortress under reconstruction. Refugees from the damaged sectors crowded the lower courtyards. Corrin worked alongside soldiers and civilians alike, hauling debris, setting up shelters, sharing rations. He never asked for recognition, but people noticed. They began calling him Kael'vire, Hearthand, for the way he'd pulled their princess from the abyss twice over. Lysara recovered slowly, her connection to the Heartstone both a burden and a gift. She could sense disturbances in the planet's energy grid, predict seismic shifts, even soothe agitated wildlife with a touch. But it drained her. Some nights, Corrin found her on the rooftop garden, staring at the stars, tears glistening on her cheeks. "It's like hearing a song no one else can hear," she confessed once. "Beautiful, but lonely." He sat beside her, not too close, not too far. "Then I'll learn the tune," he said, "even if it takes my whole life." She leaned into him then, just slightly, and for the first time he didn't pull away. But peace, it seemed, was not meant to last. One evening, as Corin reviewed patrol routes with the new head of security, a distress signal crackled over the comms. A civilian transport, the Starling Dawn, had gone missing near the Ashen Belt. Its last transmission mentioned blue ghosts and singing metal. The ship carried over 200 souls, including children from the outer colonies sent to study at the Royal Academy. Worse, intercepted chatter suggested the Iron Maw hadn't been acting alone. A faction from the Krell hegemony, the galaxy's most ruthless slaver syndicate, had funded Vexus's coup. Their goal? Not the Heartstone's power, but its genetic key. They believed royal Zyran blood could be weaponized to control other psychic species. And they'd taken hostages to lure Lysara out. "They want me," she said when told. "I'll go." "No," Corin and Zarina said at once. "You're the Heartstone's anchor now," the Queen argued. "If you fall, so does Zyra." "But those children," Lysara's voice broke. "They're scared. I can feel it. Faint, like echoes in a well." Corin studied the star charts. The Starling Dawn had last been seen near the derelict rings, a graveyard of ancient warships orbiting a dead moon. Perfect for an ambush. Perfect for a trap. "I'll go," he said quietly. Zarina frowned. "You're one man who knows how to disappear," he replied. "And I've got something they don't expect." He turned to Lysara. "Give me a drop of your blood, just enough to mimic your signature on their scanners." She understood instantly. "You'll pose as bait. If they think they've captured you, they'll get careless." He smiled grimly. "And careless men make mistakes." The plan was reckless, suicidal even, but with time running out it was the only play. 3 nights later, Corin launched in a stolen scout vessel painted with royal insignia, a vial of Lysara's blood wired into the transponder. He flew alone, heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of what he carried. Not just lives, but trust. Hers, the Queen's, his own. He found the Starling Dawn adrift in the rings, its hull scarred but intact. As predicted, Krell skiffs swarmed him the moment he hailed them, claiming to be Princess Lysara seeking parley. They boarded aggressively, stun rods crackling. Corin played his part, knees trembling, voice shaking, hands raised in surrender. Inside the Krell command ship, a grotesque fusion of organic tech and rusted steel, he was dragged before their commander, a hulking brute with 4 eyes and skin like boiled leather. "Where is the real princess?" the creature growled. "She's watching," Corin lied, glancing at a nearby view screen. "If I don't return with the hostages, she'll trigger the Heartstone remotely. Your fleet will be vaporized before you blink." The commander hesitated, greed warred with caution in his many eyes. Finally, he snarled, "Bring the prisoners." Children shuffled in, pale and thin, their eyes wide with terror. Among them was a small girl with green-tinged skin and orange hair, clearly not Zyran, but one of the mixed-blood orphans the Academy had taken in. She clutched a stuffed toy shaped like a skylark. Corin's chest tightened. He thought of his sister, of promises he'd failed to keep. Then, as the Krell guards turned to fetch more captives, he moved. Years of combat training took over. He disarmed the nearest guard, used his rifle as a club, and triggered the emergency beacon hidden in his boot. A signal synced to Lysara's frequency. The ship's lights flickered. Alarms wailed. Confusion erupted. But the Krell were fast. One slammed a fist into Corin's wounded ribs. Pain exploded through him. He went down hard, tasting blood. As darkness crept in, he saw the green-skinned girl dart forward, jamming her toy into a control panel. Sparks flew. The gravity plating failed. And then light, not from weapons, from her. The girl's eyes glowed emerald. The ship groaned as unseen force twisted bulkheads like tinfoil. Corin realized with shock. She wasn't just an orphan. She was a latent psychic, possibly descended from a lost Zyran bloodline. And she'd just awakened. Outside, Lysara's rescue fleet dropped out of warp, led by the Queen herself aboard the Royal Dreadnought Azure Fong. Energy beams lanced through the void. Krell ships exploded like rotten fruit. Corin blacked out. He woke in the palace infirmary again, bandages fresh, ribs restitched. Lysara sat beside him, holding his hand. The green-skinned girl, now named Mira, peeked from behind her, clutching a new Skylark toy. "You did it," Lysara whispered. "We did it," he corrected. Queen Zarina entered, her expression unreadable. But then she placed a hand on Mira's head. "This child will be raised as my ward. Her gifts must be nurtured, not feared." She turned to Corrin. "You keep bringing strays home, human." He grinned weakly. "Guess I've got a soft spot for lost causes." Zarina's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Perhaps it is time we made your presence here permanent." Before Corrin could ask what she meant, Lysara squeezed his hand tighter. Her eyes held a question, quiet and profound. And for the first time, Corrin didn't look away. Outside, the twin suns rose over a scarred but healing world. The Heartstone pulsed gently beneath the palace, its song now shared between two souls, one born of starlight, the other of stardust. And somewhere in the vast, indifferent galaxy, hope flickered like a candle in the wind, but refused to go out. In the year that followed the Krell ambush and the awakening of Mira's latent gifts, the winds of Zyra began to shift, not with the howl of war, but with the quiet hum of rebuilding. The scars on the palace walls were not erased, but woven into new mosaics depicting courage, sacrifice, and unexpected kinship. Corrin Vale, once a nameless soldier from a dying world, found himself no longer an outsider, but a thread in the very fabric of Zyran society. Queen Zarina, ever pragmatic yet softened by time and loss, convened the royal conclave one final time, not to declare war, but to announce a union. "The Heartstone has spoken through my daughter," she declared before the gathered houses, her voice ringing with quiet authority. "And the stars themselves have borne witness to this human's loyalty. Let it be known. Corrin Vale shall stand beside Princess Lysara not as consort, but as co-ruler by choice, by bond, and by blood." There were murmurs, of course. Old nobles clutched their traditions like brittle bones. But when Lysara stepped forward, radiant in robes spun from moon silk and desert lilies, and took Corrin's calloused hand in hers before the entire court, even the most hardened skeptics fell silent. She didn't need to speak. The way she looked at him, like he was both shelter and sunrise, said everything. Their wedding was held beneath the twin suns at dawn, in the garden of echoing vows, where ancestral voices whispered blessings through crystalline leaves. Corrin wore armor reforged from the wreckage of the Iron Maw's grav tanks, polished to a soft gleam. Lysara wore white, not the stark ceremonial white of mourning, but the luminous white of new beginnings, threaded with threads of blue so deep they seemed to hold galaxies within them. Mira, now officially adopted into the royal line, walked ahead of them scattering petals that glowed faintly as they fell. When the high priest asked if any objected, silence reigned. And when Corrin spoke his vows, not in flowery Zyran verse, but in simple, honest words, he said only this: "I promise to see you, not just your beauty, not just your power, but your fears, your laughter, your stubbornness at 3 in the morning when you refuse to sleep because you're recalibrating the atmospheric filters again. I'll be there, always." Lysara's reply brought tears even to the queen's eyes. "You taught me that love isn't perfection. It's showing up with burnt stew and mismatched socks and staying anyway. I choose you, again and again." They sealed their vows not with a kiss alone, but with a shared touch upon the Heartstone, which flared gently in response, its light weaving around them like a living embrace. Peace did not come overnight. The galaxy remained vast and often cruel. But Zyra, under the joint rule of Queen Lysara and King Corrin, as the people soon began calling him, became a beacon. They opened their borders to refugees of all species, founded schools where human history was taught alongside Zyran star lore, and established the Concord of Sands, a neutral alliance dedicated to diplomacy over destruction. Corrin, once a battlefield medic, now oversaw a network of interstellar clinics. Lysara, once sheltered by grief, traveled the deserts herself, listening to villagers, healing rifts between clans, her white hair catching the wind like a banner of hope. And children came, many of them. First was Terran, born under a solar eclipse, with his father's stubborn jaw and his mother's glowing eyes. He could calm sandstorms with a lullaby by age 3. Then came Alira, fierce and clever, who once outnegotiated a merchant guild at 6 years old using nothing but logic and a well-timed yawn. Twins Kaelin and Soria arrived next, mischievous, inseparable, and already showing signs of inherited psychic resonance. And finally, little Nima, born during the Great Bloom when the desert flowers erupted in color for the first time in a century. She rarely spoke, but animals followed her like silent guardians. Mira, their adopted sister, grew into a scholar warrior, mastering both ancient Zyran energy arts and human engineering. She never married, but became a beloved aunt to them all, often found teaching the children how to build hover toys or decode alien poetry. Corin never lost his earthborn humility. He still fixed leaky pipes in the lower quarters, still told terrible jokes at dinner, and still held Lysara's hand every night before sleep. Some evenings they'd sit on the sky balcony, the same one where an assassin once struck, and watch their children play in the gardens below, their laughter rising like music. Queen Zarina, now grandmother of the realm, spent her days tending the royal orchard, her once fearsome presence softened by grandchildren who climbed into her lap without fear. "You've given me more than peace," she told Corin once, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me joy I thought I'd buried with my husband." Years turned to decades. The wars of the past became stories told by firelight. The Heartstone, now stable and harmonious, pulsed gently beneath the palace. A silent guardian, no longer a weapon, but a cradle of life. On their 50th anniversary, Corin and Lysara stood again in the Garden of Echoing Vows. Older now, their hair streaked with silver and starlight. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, a tapestry of blue skin, human warmth, and blended heritage. The sky above shimmered with auroras, a gift from the planet itself. "I was wrong, you know," Corin said softly, squeezing her hand. "About what?" Lysara asked, leaning into him. "You're not too beautiful to love," he said, smiling. "You're exactly beautiful enough." She kissed him then, under the twin suns that had witnessed their beginning, and would, in time, watch over their legacy. And so they lived not just peacefully but fully, with laughter echoing through marble halls, with gardens blooming in the desert, with children who carried both Earth and Zyra in their hearts. Their story became legend, not for its battles, but for its tenderness. Not for its power, but for its grace. For in the end, peace was never the absence of war. It was the presence of love, chosen, nurtured, and passed on, like starlight handed from one generation to the next. Years melted into decades, and the desert winds carried only laughter through the palace halls. Corin and Lysara ruled not with thrones, but with open hands and shared sunsets. Their children, 5 in all, grew strong, kind, and curious, their blue skin kissed by Earth's resilience and Zyra's grace. Mira became a revered teacher, her once fearful eyes now guiding young minds across stars. Queen Zarina, gray-haired and smiling, rocked her great-grandchildren beneath Skylark's wings. The Heartstone pulsed gently, no longer a weapon, but a lullaby for the world. Markets thrived, schools bloomed, enemies became neighbors, and every evening, without fail, Corin walked hand in hand with Lysara through the garden where they'd vowed forever. They never needed grand epics, just each other, their family, and the quiet peace of a love that healed worlds.